Alright, so I'm going to give Puerto Rico a try. Picked up a reasonably priced copy, reasonable for me, less than maybe most people are selling used, but a slightly damaged box, but otherwise complete. Now, this has been suggested to me both by an old friend of mine who's kind of a Euro gamer now, and obviously it's rating on the Geek, and people who saw me run things, play things like Phoenicia, have been saying, oh, this is the one you're gonna like, whatever. It may be. It does not look like a bad game. Let me kind of briefly go over what's going on. Obviously, look, it's a Euro. You're out to get victory points. Woo! But something seems well linked to the actual theme of the game, which is you are buying little chits and grabbing pieces of land and developing them on your card. That seems almost natural for this game, and it looks like it works well and you can produce. The mechanism that this all works on is each player in turn gets to pick an action. And those actions, everyone gets to perform that action, but the player who picked it not only performs it first, but also, which may or may not be an advantage, I'm not sure yet, but also gets, I think in some cases it very definitely is, but they also get some sort of little bonus. And if no one did that, if the last round went through and no one chose that action, well, it gets, I think victory point markers, not money, right? I don't know. Let me make sure. But you get a bonus for picking actions that no one else took. Yeah, it's money, not victory points. Okay. Yeah, that kind of makes sense, because most of the bonuses look like they're worth about $1. For example, you take the Prospector, nobody gets to do anything, but you get $1. Alright. So what do the different actions do, and how the hell do you end up? Takes 3 doubloons, placing 1 on each of the 3 roll cards which were not selected in the round. Well, wow. We got multiples of cards. So you don't play with all the cards when you don't play with a full deck if you have less people. Now, what do you remove? That's not clear to me. I mean, let's say we're playing with 3 people. Clearly, I've got to remove more. I guess I can remove these 2, and that would leave 3, and that's probably what it is. So yeah, the Prospectors are the filler rolls, because nothing happens. So what happens with others? Well, let's look at some of them. The Settler, each player gets to pick a plantation, and there'll be some face up out here, so they can pick the ones they want. And I'll put some out. I think I put 6 out, 1 more than the number of players there are. But there's only 5 piles. Harsh. They don't seem to be at any order. And they all produce different goods if somebody's working in the field. Now, the first person, I'm not sure if everyone else has this right, but the first, well, I know that everybody else doesn't. The first person has the right with the Settler, let me put that first since I handled it first, to grab a quarry instead, which gives a different advantage if you have somebody working there. Let me just peek. Ow. So the first player has to take a face-up one or the quarry. Everyone else is able to take a face-up plantation pile. Yeah. Okay. It looks like you can never draw a random one. So you have to choose from the pile that's out there, and there'll be one more than there are players. So, you know, there's some option there. Or, if you're the first player, you can take a quarry. Let's look at the next one. The next one's the mayor. And the mayor generates colonists. And the way that happens is each player, in turn order, takes a colonist off the colonist ship. Well, I don't see any colonists on the colonist ship. Looks like at the beginning of the game there aren't going to be any, because, so here's what happens. The first player, the player who picks the mayor, gets a free colonist. And these are the colonists, yeah, like short coffee. So it looks like there aren't any colonists on the ship to begin with, but once someone picks the mayor, then after all colonists are distributed, new colonists show up on the ship equal to the number of empty circles on buildings. Not on plantations, only on buildings. Okay, that's kind of interesting. What about the builder? The builder, put him in place. You're allowed to build buildings. Makes sense. And they go in your city. And some of the buildings are larger than others and take up 2 spaces. There's a very limited counter mix of buildings in the game. I'm not sure if there's less of the multiple ones. You're only allowed 1 of each type of building on your own card. And you pay the cost of the building, which is the gray number in the circle, in the first circle if there's more than 1, in doubloons. And the first player's advantage is he can pay 1 less. And then everybody in clockwise order, and of course, because I'm weird, I'll do everything counterclockwise, starting from that upper left corner. That's just how I play solitaire. Now, there's additional reductions to the cost for each quarry you have with someone working that quarry. And that makes sense, you know. I mean, you have extra stone to build buildings with, right? Oh, very nicely linked together, I think. The craftsman. Well, the craftsman says, I get to build stuff. I get to produce goods. Now, what do you produce? These are your goods, by the way, these little hexagon pieces. And you produce goods from the supply based on your production. Now, what is your production? Your production is a little bit more complex than just people on the farms. You also, in many cases, have to have matching. Now, corn producing is free. Everything else, you have to have people matching it in a plant, or a mill, or the tobacco storage, or the roaster. And that, however many plantations you have to have buildings and people working both to support that. Okay. What's the advantage for the person who picks that first? I think they get a free good of those that they can legitimately produce. This is a terrible card to pick before you have anything on the board, right? So it should not be a good choice until you've at least got some development, because otherwise you get no bonus. What about the next one? The next one's the trader. Now, the trader works with the trading house. And the player who picks it gets to sell one of his goods, any good he has, which is any color, and sells it for the price listed here. So it's really good to sell what is the black stuff. Is that coffee? I think it's coffee. And tobacco's, you know, and then we go down to corn, which is worth nothing. But you can still sell corn for nothing. Now, if you're the first player, you get an extra buck. So even if you sell corn, you can get a buck. And this is done in order until everybody's either had a turn to sell or there's 4 objects in here. And I think this is why people tell me don't play 5 players, because there's little things like this that the 5th player in the order could get boned by. I don't care. I want to try the game at its maximum number of players. I think that if a game can't shine in its maximum, it's got a problem. No. If we see, hey, one person's continuously getting boned, but I don't see where that can happen. It seems to me that the ordering here should indicate, the fact that you have choices should indicate that there's some balance. Now, we'll see what happens. Because it could be going around 5 times and then a new full deck and then going around 5 times. It could be that somebody's always getting a bonus. I'm not sure. Okay. So let's go to the next one, or the last valuable one, which is the captain. This is the most complex of them. The captain is sending goods back home. Now, the first player is allowed to take a pile, as many as he can fit on a ship or has, and whichever is less, and he puts them on a ship. A ship can only carry one type of good, and you can't start a new cargo ship with that good if someone else has already started a cargo ship with that goods on it, which can be kind of tricky, I guess. Now, so not only am I going over the rules here, which is probably totally pointless because other people have done a better job, but this is helping me reinforce them in my own head. So feel free to jump ahead to the play or even the review if you're interested. One thing to realize, this is from a totally non-Euro player perspective. So if you're a Euro player and you want me to say, this is a worker placement game, well, obviously this one is, because this is the one that I said other ones were worker placement games, sort of, and didn't feel much like it, and they said, no, they're no worker placement. Okay, well, I'm placing workers, what do you want to call it? Okay, but this one definitely feels like that, because I've got to put my my little half coffees on top of locations to make them produce goods. Okay, so now each barrel of good that I put on board a ship gets me a victory point. And what's my bonus? I don't know what it is. I think I get an extra victory point, but I'm not sure. When no more goods can be loaded, each player must store the goods left on their windroses. Yeah. So you get a free good you can store at the end of this phase. Any other goods you store have to come from warehouses, which, and there may be other things that do this as well, but which give you the ability to store a whole type of good for free in addition. And then any ships that are completely filled at the end of this, well, they dump their goods back into the bank pool or whatever so that they're available. The ones that aren't completely full stay out there to kind of make the next shipping a little bit less valuable. So yeah, the guy who picks the captain gets an extra victory point if he loads any goods on a ship. The prospectors, well, they give you a buck. That's pretty lousy. And that, again, may be one of the reasons the 5-player game isn't that great, because there's a couple of these in here and maybe not as many good options for the last player. But eventually the values of these unchosen things are going to go up. And at the very least, even if there are no good options, you probably can take a buck. Okay. Then The governor puts an extra buck on each of the 3 cards that aren't chosen. And here's the question I have. Does he pass? I believe he passes the governor card. Right. So that would go to the left, which is clockwise, so it goes to the right in my game. And then we start a new round. And that just keeps going until the game ends. When does the game end? The game ends when the mayor can't fill the colonist ship. There's too many colonists already on the board, and there's a lot in there, so that's going to take some time to happen, I would assume. The building phase. If you fill your entire city with stuff. Or in the captain phase, if the last victory point chip is used, and people keep scoring victory points during that captain phase, it's just, it's like the bank breaking in an 18xx game. And then what do you get? Who wins? The person with the most victory points. You get victory points for your victory point chips. You get victory points for city buildings. The victory point is up here in the upper right corner. And some occupied large buildings give additional victory points as their special ability. All the buildings have their own special abilities. So for example, the wharf, when there's a captain phase, you can send your own special shipment with just your goods, and it just gets scored, and that's all that happens. That's kind of cool, as long as you have somebody in there working it. If there's a tie for victory points, the person with a combination of most doubloons and goods in their hand wins. Not much there. Not much there. There's a lot of special rules on each of the different buildings. There's no question of that, and especially when you start working the production and etc. But to me, the initial view of this is, it sounds, you know, honestly, a lot of games kind of do, but it sounds like it's fairly well tied to what we're talking about. Sure, you could move this to something else, but it does seem fairly natural here. The something else would have to be a building and workers type of mechanic, theme for this mechanic to work. So I kind of look forward to it. Unfortunately, it does look like many of the Euros, there's not a lot of competitive actions, but it does look like there's some. For example, there's only a limited number of spaces on the ships. There's only a limited number of spaces here. I think those factors are going to be kind of interesting for how the game works. There's also, of course, you know, what's available, but that's just, you know, you're kind of bidding auction or just taking or whatever, which is pretty standard in these games. You can screw someone over by taking something someone else wanted, but I don't consider that terribly interactive. Still, you're pretty much playing your own little board, and yes, you may be influenced by what other people do, but nobody's going to go marching in and invading you. Alright, nobody's going to dump your stock prices. There's nothing you can do directly to other people. Not necessarily a bad thing at all, though. To tell you the truth, some of my favorite kind of business-oriented games before I ran into XX were of that nature. One that comes to mind is Executive Decision by 3M, and one I just picked up, which is kind of that way, and I can't see it in my piles. Business Management by Avalon Hill. Very cutthroat game from what I recall, but you don't really influence people directly. You only influence people by limiting their choices in the same sort of way with bidding or whatever. So this is in that same nature, and I think I don't see any reason I'm going to dislike it. Then again, I went into Phoenicia with a pretty open mind, I'd say, initially, and then became kind of discouraged with it. Although I probably judged it a little too harshly. I certainly could see enjoying it more with other people, and I think the same is with most of these. Most of these lighter games, it's harder to really say, yeah, I want to play that solo. You know, there's just the decisions are too many, too quickly, and too pivotal for a good solo experience as far as I'm concerned. All right, so let's give this a shot. I'll send it up. I spent a lot more time talking than I meant to. See if we have fun.